to the second ever episode of the Campfire. Just a reminder, my name is Crystal. I'm technically a writer working for the web on the AMP project. I got two talented and awesome ladies joining me today, Caroline and Naina. Would you two please introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name's Naina, and I lead product for the AMP project.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm a software engineer on the AMP project.
Awesome. Thank you both again for joining me today. I'm really excited to introduce today's topic and get started with our first question, which is, what is Bento and why is it awesome?
I can get started there. I think Bento came up coincidentally as a name between a conversation Crystal and I were having about this project. And once you understand the concept, you'll hopefully understand why we came up with this name. The idea is that we got a lot of feedback from developers that they really liked the components that AMP had to offer, that they found that they were very straightforward to use, and that they still had that whole performance promise that was associated with AMP. But they wanted to use these AMP components on non-AMP pages or outside of creating a valid AMP page. So what experience would allow for them to take out the loveliness that is associated with AMP, the performance, the security guarantees, and use them on otherwise non-AMP pages? And that's where the idea is to take out AMP components and use them in non-AMP contexts. And since we were going to announce this at AMPConf in 2019 and it was going to be in Japan, that's where the name Bento came from as well. So that's roughly how we think about Bento.
Yeah, and I would also like to add that it's not just using the components somewhere else, right? It's how much of AMP do you want and how much of AMP is right for you. And Bento really allows you to choose the gradation that's most helpful.
Thanks. That's a really great overview of like what Bento is and like what inspired the name. Anybody who has watched anything I've been involved with knows I love puns, so I can't thank you enough for leaning into the Bento name. But that leads us right into our next question, which is, so Bento components are AMP components, but not. Caroline, I know you work on like the engineering side of things pretty heavily. Can you explain like what that relationship really is?
Sure. So the Bento components are effectively AMP components. They're going to look and feel the same way. For AMP document authors, we have the same UI, the same accessibility principles applied to them, and of course the same consideration for performance. And being Bento changes the internals so that they can be used in even more environments, right? So if you don't have an AMP document, but you're still developing an HTML framework, you can import our custom elements and they'll just work the way that you would expect without the AMP runtime. And the way that they're powered to work in the custom element layer to be mutable, to be interactive, so that both component developers, AMP contributors, and document authors can interact and sort of configure the component they want. That is actually powered under the hood with Preact in many cases. And so there's also this Preact mode of Bento that people who developed with Preact or React contexts will also be familiar with. And again, it's the same UI, same feel of the components, almost identical feature sets in all the environments, that is more suitable to sort of the development flow that more people are accustomed to.
And I kind of want to know if there's like, what does that really mean to take it out of the runtime environment? Like, what impact does that have on like web development as a whole or development with AMP, and like a general idea of like what that means for me as somebody coming into Bento for the first time, or AMP in general?
So there's a lot to this answer, but what makes an AMP document, right, is we have these restrictions and guarantees on performance based on basic rules. There's a maximum amount of CSS you can have on the page, that you can't have custom JavaScript. You can only have a certain type of HTML markup, right, that fits our AMP validator. And the runtime takes these rules as assumptions on what kind of context the document is operating in. So it will be able to identify if your AMP document is linked to a canonical document, if it's been cached or transformed or served in a certain way. That so these sort of behaviors are foundational to an AMP document, and AMP components largely, in the old way, relied on these invariants and assumptions of maybe I need to pay attention to the canonical URL, or maybe I need to be sensitive to the document's larger display context. These components, when being extricated from the runtime, are both much more independent and isolated. So the outer context and the inner context of the component have a much more strict barrier and clear boundary. And I lost my train of thought. So the components are more independent from the runtime, and therefore are enabled in more environments and are interactive through not just the AMP action and event system, but also maybe JavaScript APIs. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's really safe to say that Bento enables us to take a lot of the benefits that come in the AMP environment with using these components, and it bundles them up in these individual components and allows us to take it out of these restrictive or like assumption properties that the AMP as a whole comes with. And now these components still work, still function, are still awesome without all that layers on top.
Yes, that's exactly it. You said it better than I did.
I disagree, but thank you. Well, that's awesome, because that leads me into like my next question. Is now we understand that like Bento has this ability to bundle them up and take them anywhere. But my next big question is, Bento components can be used anywhere on the web now, but where would I want to use them?
The way I think about it is you have a job to perform as a developer, right? An analogy would be you're a construction worker, you have to build a house, you have to build a building. You could choose to use really primitive tools. You could choose to start from scratch, right? You could lay every brick hand by hand if you're a construction worker. You could build every component from scratch. So for example, you could build a carousel from scratch. You could build an image gallery from scratch. You could build an entire commenting system on your platform from scratch. You can absolutely do that. But there are people who've invented tools for you to do that easily. They've invented widgets, extensions that really package these concepts together and allow you to just import in a carousel, import in an entire commenting or an entire payment system. And that's great. And those are already available out there. The way we think Bento is valuable is it adds this added performance guarantee, somewhat of a performance guarantee on top. So for example, with a carousel, we can say that this is a great carousel that allows you to put in as many images as you want, whatever kind of size you want. But we're promising you that when you use the Bento carousel, we will try and load images when they're needed. So if you have an image of, say, if you have a carousel of, say, 10 images, for example, we will only load the images that are on the screen and then load the others as and when we think that the user is going to interact with them. We also assure that we won't cause a lot of layout shift on the page. And layout shift, for those who aren't aware, is when content is moving around on the page a lot, causing potential misactions for the users. And so we're able to make those kinds of guarantees just because we have this really strong performance and user experience focused team working on these components. And that's where I think a lot of Bento's value add is. So instead of trying to do every job from scratch, you can just leverage these really great performing components, these great components with accessibility built into them, and you can just start off much quicker. You can bootstrap your problem much quicker and solve it that much quicker.
You said some really interesting points in there. Like when I was first starting to learn web development, I remember like getting up like, oh, there's a whole HTML tag for images. And then being like, wait, this doesn't exist for higher functionalities. Now I have to build out an actual carousel and things that like I wouldn't have considered. Is this lazy loading thing? Like, oh, obviously I would just load all the images at once. And what you're saying is these Bento components come with just a lot of added things that maybe people aren't necessarily always thinking about, but really contribute to the whole page experience and maybe the developer experience too. I don't know. Have
you
either
shouldn't
of you
have to think of these things? Sorry, you shouldn't have to think of these things, right? Like as a developer, you shouldn't have to think about, oh, the page should be, JavaScript should just be smart enough to know when it needs to do a job, right? In a very ideal world, the browser would be smart enough and would know when to load an image, when the user's about to see an image, or when the user's about to see a video or something like that. But since we are a little bit further away from that, the great thing is AMP has been trying out these concepts and has been baking them into components like AMP image, for example. And now, like, for example, when you look at lazy loading images, that isn't just a primitive that's available in AMP. It's available outside of AMP. Browsers now have this support for the image tag, but it's come from a lot of the testing that AMP has done for the past 5 years now. 6.
Yeah, so to backtrack, like it's the Bento components do a really great job of just coming with a lot of things that people shouldn't have to think about. They're already there and set up to go. I don't know if either of you have, well, both of you have worked on AMP, so you've built a carousel, but you've done more than build just a regular carousel. You've built a carousel that loads amazingly and can work in all these other environments. So this is, I was going to ask how building a carousel from scratch goes, but y'all know a lot. No, not well, fun.
Not fun. I'm glad you have to do it once and then you're done.
This is one thing I'm seeing a lot of talk about and a lot of questions coming through. So I have to ask it here. I have to ask it on behalf of all the people. Page experience ranking is shaking the web. Things are changing. Does that relate to Bento?
We'll start off more formatively at like what page experience is. And for those of you who know, great, you can skip forward a few seconds. But what page experience is a set of signals that will allow Google search to understand how users are perceiving a page. And it consists of a bunch of metrics that have already existed, such as whether the page is HTTPS, hence is the page secure, is the page mobile friendly, what are the ads on the page like, signals that have already existed, such as these, and then a new set of signals that the Chrome team developed, that the Chrome team worked with standards communities to develop, that are called Core Web Vitals. And these metrics measure the largest contentful paint. So when were the largest amount of pixels rendered onto the screen, cumulative layout shift, which I talked about a little bit earlier, just how much is the page moving about, making it unstable for the user, and then first input delay, so when can the user interact with the page. So these all together make up the page experience signals that Google search will use to rank pages. So that's page experience. How does page experience relate to Bento? Caroline actually mentioned earlier that a lot of like AMP's original value proposition was performance, right? And because of the fact that we have such a strong understanding of the way the page is structured, you have the AMP runtime, you have constrained CSS, we're able to make like very strong performance guarantees on the page. We can say that we'll try and help you meet page experience criteria a large part, and we have tools that you can use to understand where your page may be lacking. However, with Bento components, since each of these components can be used in isolation, and you could, for example, have a Bento carousel on your page and just have a lot of third-party JavaScript otherwise that is blocking your page, we can't make those same performance guarantees anymore. So you still have that yellow brick road to performance. What we're doing is giving you good tools to kind of go along that road, but you don't have like AMP's velvet path the full way. And that's because we don't have that very strong understanding of the page. We don't have those strong constraints that make meeting those criteria, that make meeting those thresholds easier.
I will just give us an example for cumulative layout shift. On an AMP document, we block everything essentially until all the components pieces of the document are ready to lay out. And then it gets shown to the user in a stable way and doesn't change. Of course, Bento components, not knowing what environment they're in, they can't control how the document lays out, but we've made very careful considerations that the components themselves don't cause shift in the outer document or inside themselves. So you don't have this issue of a component resizing that then pushes 10 paragraphs down, which can drastically ruin your CLS score. The components, while we can't control everything about the document, they do what they can to make things better where they are.
Awesome. So if I'm trying to like improve my page experience score and I have a carousel from in-house, um, would it benefit me? Like, is there a process for me to like check to see if like maybe switching to the Bento carousel might benefit me? Like, what would that look like?
The first thing we'd always recommend is having an understanding of what your current page is like, because you can't improve what you don't understand, right? So the Chrome team, as well as the search team, has like great tools such as the Search Console Page Experience Report, Page Speed Insights, etc., to help you understand. So in this particular case, like you can actually go and check how is that carousel affecting your performance. Is it maybe causing the CLS, like Caroline highlighted? Is it just that big that the LCP is really, your LCP value is really large, or your FID is really large? And if you see that, yes, it is causing those problems, then maybe, yeah, like maybe doing an A/B test with the Bento carousel component is worth trying out, right? Where some portion of your traffic gets your normal page as you had it constructed before, and some portion gets the Bento carousel page, and you see what the user metrics come out from that. And if you see that there is an improvement, absolutely you should be considering making those switches. But the first thing we'd always recommend is understand what your page currently performs at. What are your then go and understand what your problem points are, and then see which Bento components can actually solve those targeted issues that you have. And that's what I really like about Bento. Once you have an understanding of what targeted problems you want to solve, we either already have a component that will kind of try and answer that question, or hopefully it's on our roadmap already. And if not, please let us know, like Caroline mentioned.
Awesome. So it sounds like the answer here is like measure where you are, understand where you're trying to go, and then measure along the way these iterative changes. And Bento may be a great solution. Maybe like one of the steps, it may be the only step. You don't know unless you're measuring what you're doing, but these are really, there's a lot of engineers working on these components, and we are trying our best to make sure that they are impacting your page positively. So it's worth giving it a shot and, telling us exactly how it's going, which again perfectly leads me into the next question, which is, we know Bento is in experimental mode. Are people already using Bento? Where are they, and like what are they seeing with it?
So where I'm seeing folks is in the Slack channel. I'll bring it up again. People in the community trying things out, asking, when is AMP list going to be available? How can I combine, AMP mustache, which is an AMP only component, with with a Bento component? So there's definitely that excitement there, that engagement there, which is really exciting to see.
And if you two want to try it out, we'll leave a link in the description for the guide that actually Crystal wrote, that you can use to get started on this entire like testing out journey.
I think my final question of this awesome conversation today, again, thank you both so much, is about the future of Bento as a whole, not just the components. Can either of you speak to that? Like, what else do we have to look forward to? We're in experimental mode now. Like, what's coming up? What do I need to look out for? How should I prepare?
I think currently, absolutely just get involved. So that could be asking questions on Slack, trying out the guide, and giving us a lot of feedback, because that's what gets us to that place where we can say, okay, the technical implementation is good, the product insight is sound, and we can now actually go release. So absolutely, I think engaging with the components, trying them out is the absolute one thing that you can do for yourself as well as for us. And we'd be very grateful for that feedback. And based on like a lot of that insight, I think the future is just more components, right? Caroline and I talked about like the components we have and the ones we're excited about. It's just getting more of these 150 some odd number of components that we have out there in developers' hands, and hopefully getting that feedback that, yeah, this is solving performance problems for people. This is helping them get bootstrapped that much easier. So just the future is absolutely getting these components into people's hands as soon as we possibly can.
Awesome. Super exciting. And one final surprise question. I'm really curious what you two are going to come up with on this. If you could take one AMP component camping, which one would it be and why? I can start us off. I would take AMP accordion, because I can fold many things inside of other things, so it's compact and expandable. So I would be able to sort it all and fold it up, and take it with me into the wilderness.
That's a great answer. I want to steal it.
Can I be the Instagram person and say I'm taking social chair? Because by God, if I'm going camping, the entire world needs to know. So that's all the third party like social components, Instagram, Facebook, it's Twitter, it's going to be everywhere. So yeah, any social component is the one I'm taking camping. And a battery pack so I can use my phone.
AMP social share is a good one because like that's a lot of social functionality in one component too. So I like that. You're gonna stick with accordion, Caroline? I think you got something building up there.
I think this is gonna be a little anti-camper, okay? So I'm just gonna preface with that. I think I'd be interested in AMP time ago, like how long have I been here? How long do I have left? You know? Just to get a sense of, you know, the commitment I've made here.
I love that.
That's a good one. That's a great one. Are we there yet?
Those are both really good answers. Okay, I would take both of you and your components camping with me. It'd be awesome. All right. So, Caroline, Nana, I can't thank the two of you enough for joining me today. We've really unboxed the secrets of Bento. But before we venture out into those webby woods, I'd like to announce our topic for the next episode, AMP emails. Next time, we'll be discussing the future of email, and how it's here and now, and answering all your questions about sending interactive messages. So make sure you ask them in the comments below and tweet at us with the hashtag #cAMPfire. And that's it for today. So thank you both again so much.
Thank you for having us.